and welcome to the latest episode of History You Didn't Know But Should. I'm Ray.
And I'm Chris.
And today we're going back and we're going to look at the very tragic and unfortunate story of the Donner Party. And, you know, the Donner Party, Chris, I think is just an example of what happens when people take bad advice and then they just keep going.
Yeah, and you know, this is one of the greatest tragedies in history. And many people, I guess this is a perfect illustration of history you didn't know but should, because we're talking about westward migration. We just did a podcast not too long ago about the Transcontinental Railroad. So we have this concept of manifest destiny, and that's usually individuals who are in history classes. You know, they hear about the wild, wild west, or the glory that's going out to the west and finding gold and all. And I think sometimes, Ray, that it's made to, you know, be seen as this historical drama, and it's just this really nice story of people going out west. But there is a lot of danger that lurks in this, and it is full of distraught and despair. I mean, it's not like getting in the car and just doing a cross, country trip. I mean, this is a 2,500-mile journey that will create a lasting impression that you got to make sure that you pay attention and always do the right thing and not the easy thing.
Yeah, because, you know, a lot of people would take that route to go west to try to, after gold was discovered in 1848 in California, to try to strike it rich and you know, just try to start over in their life, to get a new start. And for a lot of people, it was going to be a very, very difficult struggle. And for the Donners, the Donner Party, as they're called, the Donner-Reed Party, it's going to be a deadly and tragic trip, because they take some very bad advice.
Well, yeah, and you know, let's think about this. So before we get into the story, I mean, let's think about our context. And here we are in 2022, and you know, usually if we're planning on taking a trip, we plan it out. We map it out. We understand, okay, are we going to take, plane, train, automobile? How are we going to get there? But we always map it. So we have a map, whether it's Google Maps, or maybe we say, ask Siri, and Siri tells us the direction that we're going to go. But we have a game plan. And I remember, like, when I'm planning trips, if I do it on my phone, it always gives me this thing. It says, like, avoid tolls, fastest route, so you've got different options. And for me, I'm cheap. I don't want to pay the tolls. I don't want to do that, but I also want to take the fastest route. And sometimes taking the fastest route takes you down different directions than maybe you would want to go, right? But if you're in a hurry and you really need to get somewhere, you're willing to maybe have a few obstacles in your path or things of that nature to get there. And so what I think happens is you have this guy, and I know you're going to introduce the story, this businessman, and that's what he is. He's a businessman, and he's looking to, as you said earlier, get rich and get rich quick. And the only way he can get rich is not in Illinois, but he's got to go to California. So here's the thing, it's a 2,500-mile journey. And if somebody tells you, Ray, that you can cut probably 400 to 500 miles off your journey, you're probably going to sign up for that.
I'm on board.
Right. And knowing that if somebody's selling you on that, they probably haven't told you all of the particulars with it. They haven't told you all the details with it. They probably haven't even told you, well, I haven't tried this, but this is what I heard.
It's the old saying, if it sounds too good to be true, it probably is. The story begins, as you said, with an Illinois businessman, a guy by the names of James Reed. And he's wanting to get rich. He's wanting to make his fortune. And so he needs to go out to California. And he has gotten hold of a book called The Immigrant's Guide to Oregon and California by a guy called Lansford Hastings. And Mr. Hastings has put together this book, and he's advertising this route that would, like you said, allegedly take off about 300 to 400 miles off the trip going west to California. And it's known as the Hastings route. Now, the problem with Hastings' route and with his Immigrant's Guide to Oregon and California is that Mr. Hastings had never actually, at the time he published the book, he had never actually taken this route. I guess this was something he had mapped out. In theory, it looked like a good route, but in reality, it was not a good route because there were no prepared trails. They were going to have to go through land where they were going to need to clear trees. They were going to go through deserts where their wagons were going to get stuck in the sand. They're going to get delayed and delayed and delayed going down this path. And actually, Chris, when we get into the story, we're going to find out that Hastings himself tries to send a note back to the Donner Party saying, whoa, guys, this is maybe not going to work. But early on, he's put this book out, and Mr. Reed, James Reed, has gotten hold of this book and is now dedicated to following Hastings' route west to California.
And it's not just him that's interested in following this route. We also have to remember that when Reed was thinking about doing this, he was insistent that he have a group of people that would go along with him, but they were based on families. Yeah. So this route is about to be embarked upon by men, women, and children. And, I think it's interesting that Reed is taking his wife with him, but not only is he taking his wife with them, but they are taking the people that we'll mention in a moment, the Donner family, and some other individuals who are familiar with how to use the wagons and the oxen and things. But, this at the beginning, I think there's like 32 men, women, and children that's going to go. But they're even taking along Reed's wife's mother, who is like 70 years of age. And what I thought was interesting is she is already not well. She is on the verge of dying just about from what I read. She could barely walk, but she didn't want to lose her,
She had consumption, yeah.
Consumption. And she didn't want to leave her daughter, and her daughter wasn't going to leave her. And so we're about to embark on a 2,500 mile journey with a woman who can barely walk, along with children. I mean, Ray, you just have to say it's set up for disaster, but not for the kids. The kids thought it was a cool road trip. They were looking forward to it. And Reed, he made sure that he had the Cadillac edition of his wagon. I don't know if you read about that, but I thought it was interesting that he wanted to make sure that he knew it was long, but that his family wouldn't suffer. And so he created what was known as the Pioneer Palace car that had like a built-in iron stove. It was two-story. They had spring cushion seats and bunks for sleeping. And his 12-year-old daughter was like, oh, cool, this is going to be fun. Well, yeah, every kid thinks a road trip's fun for the first 5 minutes.
Right.
And then the question is, how much longer? Are we there yet?
Can you imagine one of his kids going, are we there yet?
Absolutely.
4 more months.
I mean, it sounds like a really cool, we're going on an adventure, and I'm all about going on an adventure, but this is just setting up. Even though we don't really know all that's going to happen yet based on the story, there's just a lot that could go wrong. And it just makes you think, were they really ready for all of this? But somehow he convinces his buddy, George and Jacob Donner. He convinces those guys, hey, join us for this. And that's where we get to the Donner Party, I guess.
Yeah. And, they head out, and apparently they have like 9 wagons. That was the main family wagon. But of course, there were other people going along, servants and others. So the group will ultimately have about 9 wagons, cattle, this whole big caravan heading west to California. Now, the first major stop along this journey is going to be in Independence, Missouri. And this was sort of going to be the launching part of their journey. This was going to be the part where the real trip to California, to Oregon, was going to begin. And I came out with some very interesting information. If you were heading west from Missouri at this point, you really wanted to leave by sometime in early to mid-April. That was about the latest you wanted to leave. but they actually did not leave Independence, Missouri till mid-May. So they're getting a late start on their westward journey. And of course, you wanted to avoid the colder weather, but especially the snow. And as we see when we get further along into the story, they're not going to avoid that. They're going to get bogged down in blizzards and in very heavy snow, which is what's going to bring about many of the tragic events that are going to take place.
And they knew this. I mean, that's the thing. They knew they needed to leave by April. They knew what was going to come. And this is where I think pride and greed and the opportunity for new beginnings, you just say, oh, we'll be fine. We'll push through. We'll make it. How bad can it be?
And they do that multiple times on this journey. And you talked about the Donner, and we call it the Donner Party, not the Reed Party, though some people do call it the Donner-Reed Party. But there were two brothers, George Donner and Jacob Donner. Now, these two brothers were in their 60s. I mean, these were older guys at this time. And nowadays, of course, 60s, not old. 60s, the new 50 nowadays, right?
That's right.
But, these two guys, they were in their early 60s, and they wanted, I guess you could say, one last adventure, one last hoorah. So they joined this trip to California. And of course, like Reed, they bring their families along. And so again, the group, and this is what you see, if you follow this adventure in some detail, they just keep picking people up as they go along. You know, they start off with this one group, and then they just keep adding people to the trip. And that's going to become a problem when they don't have enough food to feed the people they got, and then they keep bringing on more people. So they're going to have a lot of problems as they move on. So they're going to leave Independence, Missouri on May 12, 1846. They're actually going to join a caravan, a wagon train captained by Colonel William Russell. And they're going to go with that for a little while. And of course, then they're going to break away from that group after Russell dies. They're going to get to Fort Laramie, Wyoming. And Chris, here's one of the first red flags they're really going to run into. And that is a guy by the name of James Clyman, who apparently had traveled with Hastings, thank you. When Hastings, he came up to Reed and he said, no, you don't need to go down that route. Go the traditional route. Go the route already sort of plowed out for you. Don't take this new route. You're not going to be able to get through it with wagons and all this cattle. It's almost impossible to get through on foot. But of course, like you said, pride gets the best of them. And James just sort of dismisses this warning and decides to go on the Hastings route anyway.
And there's another thing I think we need to keep in mind with this, and that is first one out west lays claim to the money, right? And so, I mean, there is the possibility that these guys were in competition with each other, because if you beat the other guy, you've got the better chance at the job, you've got the better chance at the land. So there's a lot of distrust that is going on. And I now this is me making an assumption. I could be totally wrong, but just knowing kind of how things are going, I wonder in this moment if what happens is that, he meets up with, Reed meets up with Clyman. Clyman says, don't go down that road. Don't go down that road. It's bad. That Reed in the back of his mind is thinking, oh, you're trying to make me 250 miles later than you. Maybe you're just playing with me. It's where that doubt kind of goes into it. I just wonder if he was like, no, we're going to keep pushing through because he might be setting me up for failure. Maybe I'm wrong. I don't know. But what I do know is that it doesn't matter, because he continues to say, hey, we're going to go. And what happens is at that moment, there are some wise people in that group who say, yeah, we're going to take the safer route. I mean, we hear you, and maybe it's a ploy, maybe it's a trick, but we're just going to take that safer route. So you guys go ahead and take the other one, but we're going to take the safer route. And so when they split up, you've got Reed kind of going one way. And then, they say, okay, well, we want this George Donner guy to kind of be our captain, and we're going to focus on him and allow him to kind of take us where we go. And as you mentioned, they're now up to like 74 people. So, I mean, we started out with 32. We're now up to 74 people. They got about 20 wagons, and they're making a pretty good clip. I don't know how fast a wagon can typically go, but you think you got family, you got supplies, you got food, you got all these other goods. I mean, Ray, they're actually making about 10 to 12 miles per day. That's pretty good. But then, Ray, as they go further a little bit, and what they do is they come to a halt when they find another note. This time it's coming from the actual writer of the book, the one who the trail is named after, Mr. Hastings. And he says, don't go down this way. It's a mess, right?
Yeah, and so they decide to camp out, and they were making good timing up to a point, and once they start running into a lot of trouble, they're making less than a mile a day, 2 miles a day. So they're doing really good for a while, and then they start running into all of this trouble that we're starting to read about, and things start going downhill pretty fast. They do get a note from Hastings advising them do not follow the Hastings route. Do not go down Weber Canyon. You know, like I said earlier, basically saying it's not passable, especially with cattle and wagons and all of that stuff. So James Reed and 2 other men on horseback go to catch up with Hastings. And they do find Hastings. So they break away from their group to go find Hastings. They find him. And then he's got another route to help them get back to their camp. And that's not a very good route. So I think at this point, Chris, if I was in this party, first off, I'd have decided, no, let's go the regular way by this point. I might have been good for the shortcut for a little while, but by this point I've been like, no, we're just hitting the regular way. But at this point, after Hastings now misled us with his book, and now his other directions aren't working out, I think I would leave him in the desert somewhere.
Yeah, because after a while, when Siri keeps saying recalculating, rerouting, there's a little thing that goes off in your head that says there's probably a reason for this. You know, it's kind of like, I don't know if it's you or me or whatever, when you're driving down the road and it says road closed a mile ahead.
Yeah.
And you immediately think, well, I wonder if it's really closed, or I wonder how far down. Maybe it's before the turn or after the, we just think we know better than what a sign in the road is telling you, or what that thing in your conscience is telling you. And that is turn around, turn around, turn around. They decide not to turn around. And then it's not long that they realize that they're going to have to lose their wagons, which means they're going to have to lose some of their supplies, which means that some of the people are going to have to start walking, which means that this is getting really, I think this is where morale starts to take a really bad turn. And I think not just morale, but I think that you start to see the blame game coming. The distrust that starts to happen among the group. Conflict is going to start in among this group because, they are being bogged down, and the process is really slowed down to nothing. And then, Ray, they wind up in a desert.
Yeah, they end up in the Great Salt Lake Desert, and they lose a lot of their cattle here. A lot of their cattle begins to die. Their water supply starts drying up. I think by this point they end up through the desert losing like 30 some cattle, which of course the cattle was their food supply, and they bought on more people than they originally planned. Now their food supply is dying all around them. They end up at one point, they do an inventory on food. And at the point they do this food inventory, they still got some 600 miles to go, and they don't have enough food. So right here, again, the red flags are popping up all over the place, but they just keep going. And you talk about division that's going to come up. They're blaming Reed. Reed's taking some blame. You dragged us into this. You had this idea, all of this. They're blaming Hastings, which is, I think, where my blame would go. But they're trucking along, and then things are going to get even worse in October at a place called Iron Point, when 2 wagons get entangled, and a guy called John Snyder is trying to, I guess, get his his oxen to to move, and it's not cooperating with him. So he starts beating the oxen. And Reed doesn't like this and orders the guy to stop. And when he doesn't, Reed takes out his knife and stabs the man to death. Mm. And of course, the result of this is, we got to do something about this because he's just killed this man in cold blood. There's some people in the group that say we need to hang Reed and go ahead and put him to death. There are others who say, no, we just need to banish him. And that's ultimately what happens. He's banished from the group, and the party continues to travel west, leaving Reed, I guess, to himself. Now he's going to show back up later in the story, but at this point he's sort of abandoned by the group.
And not only does he become abandoned by the group, but now they got to make up time. They have fallen way behind, which means they don't have the supplies. And now it is basically every man, woman, and child for themselves. And once again, you've lost oxen, you've lost a lot of the wagons. So people are actually having to walk. And, there's, when you were mentioning John Snyder, he's really one of the first ones that really experiences death on the trail, right? I mean, I think early on there was the mom that I mentioned earlier, the mom who said, I'm never leaving my daughter. And she died, but we knew, don't want to say we knew, but we knew she was going to die. She did. But then, there's this guy who is really suffering. I think his name was Louis Kesselberg. And basically, he just couldn't keep up with him. His feet were swollen. He was struggling. He was having a hard time. And basically, nobody wanted to take him in. Nobody wanted to offer him help. Nobody wanted to say, hey, you're part of the group.
Was this the guy that was going from wagon to wagon, knocking, asking for people to help him, and they just all refused?
And they all refused. And finally, what happens, he's getting further and further and further behind, and nobody stops.
They just leave him out there.
Yeah. They leave him out there, and the story says, the primary documents say the last anybody saw of him, he was sitting underneath a little bush or something like that, exhausted, spent, and couldn't walk, worn out, and they just left him there to die. And so the train has come off the rails, and this isn't even the worst part. This is just the beginning of when the worst part is going to start going, but they are still headstrong and pushing forward.
Yeah. And what they really wanted to do was leave in April, like I said, so they could avoid the snows, which generally would start falling sometime in November. Well, they didn't leave till May, like we said earlier. And then guess what? You have early snowfall. So the snow starts in October. So it's not just that they're making bad decisions, like everything's sort of working against them. And the snow begins to fall in October. So now they have to start dealing with trying to get the wagons through the snow and all of the stuff that comes along with that.
Yeah. And, I remember, I think it's now November. I don't know, it's around November, and I even want to say I think it's Thanksgiving, where they're surrounded by the snow, and that's when they kill the last of the oxen that they have for food. So
Thanksgiving Day, I think.
Yeah, and so that's it. I mean, they've been using these oxen for travel, but they've also been using them for food purposes. And Ray, one thing that you said earlier is that this was a trail, but it wasn't a trail that had been used before. So though it was a trail, you still had to remove trees. You still had to remove obstructions. This wasn't just get in the wagon and you're just taking a nice leisurely walk. You are now having to stop, move things. I mean, very laborious work. And after killing the last of the oxen, you've got nothing. First of all, you have no food. So what they start doing is they begin eating boiled hides. They eat twigs. They find bark.
Yeah.
I mean, they try to hunt.
Reminds me of Jamestown. We have reports from Jamestown in the early 17th century, during the so-called starving time, where they were literally eating bark off the trees.
And that's just to survive.
Yeah.
But add to that, what you didn't have as much in Jamestown as you would now have here is you have the elevation, and you have the tremendous amount of snow and the extreme cold temperatures. And guess what they weren't prepared for? The snow.
Yeah, they weren't prepared, and they tried to huddle together to stay warm and stuff. It didn't work. And then you start having people dying here in the snow. December 15th, a guy named Ballas Williams dies of malnutrition. Uh, and so they're running out of food. They're running out of supplies. Um, and then Charles Stanton dies. The group is caught in a blizzard. And eventually they start resulting to cannibalism because they have nothing else to eat. So people are dying. Members of the group are dying. And I just mentioned two, but members of the group are dying, and they start looking at the dead bodies going, well, we have nothing else to eat, so we'll eat that.
And it must be said that they weren't just sitting here, just taking it all in. They literally were trying an escape route. They were trying to find somewhere to go. We have multiple reports where small groups of people would leave, and their goal was that they were going to leave and try to find rations, try to find help, and come back. But the snow is so intense, it's blizzard conditions, as you mentioned. So what you are having is little pockets of groups just experiencing hell on earth. And it becomes so difficult that, I mean, they can't even keep a fire going.
Yeah.
They don't even have enough to cover up, to have a makeshift tent. I mean, it's not like, they were just caught in a bad storm. They were caught in a bad storm, ill prepared, no planning, no preparation, no materials, and people are just dying left and right. And this has turned into a humanitarian crisis because people are now resorting to eating one another just to be able to live.
And we talk about the last cattle that they had and that they had to kill to eat was on Thanksgiving in November. Chris, it wouldn't be until February that the first rescue party, I guess we would call it today, arrives there to try to help the people. It's on February 19, the first party, which, by the way, includes James Reed. He's re-entering the story now. And when they arrive in one of the camps there, the person they see, it's a lady. I don't know who the lady was, that said she had a ghostly appearance. She was just so, I guess, lack of food and all of that. She just was in such bad shape that she almost looked like the Walking Dead, I guess you could say.
Yeah, I have this image of like these rescuers coming in and seeing the campsite and probably seeing mangled pieces of dead bodies. But then what I also kind of picture is like this Walking Dead of people coming out of the woods, just looking like death. And I can imagine being a rescuer and seeing that firsthand. They might have thought, oh my gosh, what a tragedy. What have we, and then how do we get them out of here?
And they're going to find in March is when they start discovering the evidence of the cannibalism, that they had resorted literally to eating the bodies of their co-travelers who didn't make it in the snow. And I cannot, Chris, I just can't imagine. And you can't put yourself in those situations because we've never been in those situations. But I can't imagine a situation in which I would honestly look at a dead human corpse and think, yeah, I'm going to eat that. And I believe there were people in the party who starved to death instead of eating the corpses.
Because we're not just talking about corpses. We're talking about family members.
Yeah, people
I mean, that's, a lot of people say, well, I'll do anything to survive, but not being funny, but eating a relative is not really something you can say.
No.
Yeah, I just don't think I could do that to survive. I'd rather just go on and just go, because, we understand death and the sacredness of death and the sacredness of a body, right? And I call me whatever you want to call me. I couldn't do it. I have been all over this world. I have eaten all kinds of food from all types of animals. But Ray, Everything I've put in my mouth has never been human, and I just don't think that I can. And I don't care if you're going to tell me it tastes like chicken. I ain't going to buy it. I cannot do it.
No, no. If it comes off of a human being, I think I would be among the group that would have just starved to death. I mean,
But
like, I'm not eating Uncle Billy.
yeah. But isn't it interesting that kind of as we get to the end of the story and they're rescued and they were rescued? I mean, yes, there's a lot of tragedy here, but there's also some really interesting stories of success. I mean, that some of these people made it. You know, not everybody died.
Right.
There's a lot of people made it. And I thought the ones who did make it was interesting. Did you find it to be interesting that the ones who actually came through this, their gender and their relationship, wasn't that interesting?
Yeah, the majority of the people who survived were women and children.
Yeah.
Most of the men died. I guess that they were the ones being eaten, but women and children were the ones that survived. I think it was 41 died and like 46 survived.
Which I think lends credence to why it has been said that a woman is able to birth a child, but a man never could birth a child, just because of the strength and fortitude and pain and all that a woman goes through to birth a child. I don't know if a man could handle it. And maybe it's the same thing here. Look at the resilience that these women had. Look at the fortitude that these children had to be able to fight through whatever they had to fight through to survive.
And, you know, they didn't come out of it unscathed.
Oh, right.
Because they were in the snow for long periods of time, they had frostbite, they lost toes. So, you know, they didn't come out of it unscathed. But the fact, like you said, the fact that about 46 of them actually survived this hell on earth is absolutely amazing. Because, you know, I look at the situation, you think, well, how could anybody survive this? But they do.
And you know, as we come to the conclusion of this, this is the beginning of people making the journey to California for gold. And, you know, I mean, we'll find out that by late 1849, I mean, there's 100,000 people that have traveled to California in search of gold. You said something earlier, I just want to hit before we end, when we were talking about like whose fault, you know, like whose fault. You seem to, maybe I misunderstood, so I want to make sure that it might have been Hastings. Do you think it was Hastings' fault?
Well, it is interesting that after the survivors have been rescued and everybody has sort of, I guess you could say, in a way, moved on with their lives, there was disagreements among the survivors exactly who was to blame for the catastrophe. Some blamed James Reed. Others blamed Hastings. You know, there were and there were a few other people who were actually blamed as well. Personally, if I had to personally lay blame on someone, I would probably be in the camp that blames James Reed, because he was I guess the leader of the group to some degree, at least before he was banished from the group. And, you know, he was the one who got Hastings' book and came up with this idea and kept pushing it forward, even though warning sign after warning sign said, no, you need to go the traditional route.
Yeah, I agree with you, because leadership requires that you admit when you make a mistake.
Yeah.
And that you make corrections to it. You know, Mr. Hastings, he was trying to make profit. Mm-hmm. He was trying to make money.
He's trying to make a quick buck off of a book.
Absolutely. And, you know, the problem isn't that he wrote a book that was false and hadn't been tested. I mean, yeah, that's something. But you had multiple opportunities to turn around. You had notes. You even had the man himself say, don't do it. I mean, you know, at that moment for me, it really comes back to the leader of the group who put all of these people at risk. However, you also have to look at each family member and each person, because there had to have been a moment in which they come together and schedule an intervention and say, no, we're not going to go a step further. This is too much. We've experienced too much, before it got too late. Because when they got on the mountain, it was too late. It was way too late, and you couldn't help it. But you know, Ray, I think this is a beautiful story. It's a tragic story, but I think it's a beautiful story to remind us that every decision we make has consequences, that every action we take has a reaction, and that we have to be careful that just because someone offers you a shortcut doesn't necessarily mean that you take that shortcut.
Right.
I mean, we're all about life hacks. I mean, life hacks are wonderful and they are amazing, but there is, just certain things that you always have to do. And that is this: use your brain, follow your heart, and make wise decisions. And if you've made a mistake, don't keep plunging forward. Turn around.
Yeah, when you hit the bottom of the bucket, or the bottom of the hole, don't keep digging, right?
That's right.
News of what happened here, of course, for a little while anyway, almost ended westward, people wanting to go west. The amount of people traveling west to California dropped significantly following news getting out about what happened to the Donner Reed party. But of course, when gold is discovered in 1848, cha-ching, everybody heads back out. People start heading back out, looking for gold and looking to get rich quick. So I hope everybody enjoyed this episode of History You Didn't Know But Should. We tried to take a lot of information and sort of compact it into a very relatively brief episode. So there's so much more out there on the Donner Party and on what happened and details. There's several books out there about this. I would encourage our readers, if you're interested in that, go on Amazon, find a good book on the Donner Party and learn more about some of the more details that, of course, we're not able to get into in a 25, 30-minute episode of this podcast. So I would encourage our readers, not just on this issue, but other issues as well, to go out and let this podcast be your launch pad to learn more about the historical people and events that we're talking about here. We hope you will get in contact with us, and if there's a topic you want us to cover on the podcast, let us know. We'll put it in the queue of topics that we're planning on covering, and we do have some that our listeners have reached out to us to asking us to cover, and we will certainly get to those. But please contact us. You can contact us on Facebook, Twitter, or email at historytheletterinyousshouldknow@gmail.com. That's historyyousshouldknow@gmail.com. Share this podcast with your family and friends. We're on Spotify, Sounder FM, Google Podcasts, and other podcast outlets. So until next time, I'm Ray.
And I'm Chris.
And we'll talk at you later.